So for everyone who has mentioned Sarah J. Maas to me in any live or any video, this video is for you. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. This is Charles from the channel Books on Stereo, and this has been a video that I feel like has been a long time coming. I filmed most of this video probably a month or two ago, but it's just been sitting on my computer and I don't know why I have been sitting on this video for so long. So just to do a quick intro, I had this really cool idea to kind of take a very popular author and bring in people who either love or who are indifferent or who hate this author and see if there's any commonalities to some of the reasons why we love, dislike, or maybe it might be a little bit if to some of the popular authors in this community. And since everyone keeps on mentioning Sarah J. Maas, or She Who Shall Not Be Named, I kind of butchered that. I decided to focus this video on Sarah J. Maas. And so I do want to preface this that everyone's opinions in this video are their own and their own alone, so don't be attacking anyone if they have a different opinion than you. And at the end, I will give you my perspective on my feelings towards Sarah J. Maas, and I'll just wrap up the video. So without further ado, let's get into the clips. Okay, so up first we have Jen from the book Refuge. Hi Jen, how are you doing?
I'm good. Hello.
Good. So tell me a little bit about your background with Sarah J. Maas. Like, have you read all of her books? Have you only read one of her series versus the other? Tell me a little bit how many books you read by her.
Yeah, so I've actually read everything she's written except for the novella collection, because people might or might not, I don't like novellas really at all, unless they are about unless they are like epilogue novellas, you know, like they're an HEA novel.
Like after the story is complete, you don't like novellas that like take place like within this like overall story
or beforehand, and so that's the only thing with the Assassin's Blade is that it takes place like it's these few novellas about horrible things happening to like lead you up to why we need a revolution and all this stuff. And she has a different love interest in that one. That's what that's about. And I was like, no, I think she's got enough love interests in the actual series. I don't need.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but like she doesn't necessarily engineer, so you have to read. I guess you like so for some authors they make it like necessary or not necessary to get the full story.
Right.
Is that the case with this novella collection?
Well, from what I know about it, I think there's 3 stories in there. They all just will like add to it, because as you read through the series, you run into these people again. And within her book, she gives you the context of what happened with them, right? Like a good author does is, oh, we meet Aline. This is what Aline did before. So if you read the novella, you get to see that whole story. Otherwise, if you read about Eileen, you're like, oh, okay, cool. That's what happened with her. That would have been horrible to see that character go through that anyway. I don't know. I'm a softie. So I'm like, if we're already on our track to HEA, I don't want to look backwards and see where our pain was before. Like that's fine.
You just want to focus on the happy times.
Right. I'm like,
you just want your characters to be happy.
Yes. But anyway, so my like track with her is that I first tried to read Throne of Glass about 3 times. Like not because when I first started watching BookTube, that's what everyone was reading before I ever started a channel. So I tried reading the first book like 3 times and it wasn't working. Then I saw someone do, and by someone I mean Christine Riccio from she did this spoiler review for the Court of Thorns and Roses. And I was like, oh, wow, that looks really exciting. So after trying to read the first book 3 times of the other series, I was like, well, let me try this other one. So I was able to read the first 2 books because that's all that was out. And once I got up to that, I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'll try to push through these other ones. And then when I tried it again, I was just more used to her writing style and everything. And then, I mean, I think a lot of people who love that series will say the first like 2 books, she's going one way and then it kind of makes a hard right turn. And then I was like, oh, I'm here for this. So then I got into that series. And so I caught up to that one as well. But I've been a fan for like 5 years now. So I've had to wait for a lot of books to come out.
For a lot of books. So like it's clear to say that you are you fall into the camp of like you love Sarah J. Maas, right?
Yes.
Is it just like a weird setup where you just go like, psych, I actually hate her.
Right.
Like even though I hyped up all the books, like that would have been a twist.
No, I'm in the love it camp, and
Okay.
where I'm
So
at.
I wanted to ask you, what are some of your what are your top three main reasons why you love Sarah J. Maas? It doesn't have to be specific to any book. It could just be of all the work that you read by her. Like, what are some of the things that you love? Anytime you pick up a Sarah J. Maas book, you kind of look forward to because you're like, she's gonna deliver these things for you.
Yeah. So I don't know if they, like you said, I don't know if they distinctly fall into different things, but things that I know I'm looking for is what I really loved about her is she's the one who opened my mind to the fact that fantasy romance is what I actually loved. Because I've been reading
Mm.
fantasy like the whole time I've been a reader. Like I love fantasy stories. That's what I love to read. And in YA, I was always just missing that extra spice, right? I was just
Mm.
so I would read in other books and be like, oh, it's so close. Like, quit closing the door in my face is how I would feel about stuff.
Yeah.
Before I knew what closed door meant, that's what I was wanting. And so when I read her books, and that's when I first started hearing the term like new adult, like it wasn't really being used. I mean, it's still not fully used. We know that's a whole
it's a whole hot issue.
yeah, that's a whole other video, but without even realizing it. And again, I wasn't really a part of this community yet. So I didn't realize that this was a conversation people were already having. So for me personally, I just knew that that's what I was missing in books. And so when I started to read hers and see that not only just that there's sex scenes, but and this is probably another part, there's also like there's not slut shaming in her books. None of her women that I've read, now I'm thinking through my brain. 90% of the women aren't virgins, even though they're young. So there's not that like blushing virginal aspect. And Sarah herself, like in interviews, like, that's just unrealistic to me. And she's like, it's one thing to write younger characters, but it's another to write like really innocent. She's like, I don't like writing innocent. Don't know what they want. And that's something I feel like Crescent City sorry, I'm diving everywhere, but that's something I loved. City is that was literally the point of a big part of that one is that this character is being slut shamed by everyone because something bad happened on a night that she was out and she slept with someone. She banged someone in a bathroom pretty early on while something horrible is happening. And so that stigma is like following her around. And I just thought that that's so powerful that she takes those on because we like to talk about that, oh, we don't want to slut shame people, but it still happens. And she just writes it into her books where it's not even a question. You're just like, oh yeah, she's had sex before. Okay, cool. Like
it's normalized.
Right.
It's normalized.
Yeah. And I just love reading that. So that's one of the aspects is, yes, I was starting to see romance and fantasy. And then after reading her books, I was really unsatisfied with other YA. And it really started the turning point where I realized that what I really wanted was the romance all the time because I already knew I liked romance, but I kept it on the down low, like I think a lot of us did. Like even when I started this channel, it was mostly YA fantasy and adult fantasy, and then I would read historical romances, but I'd be like, you don't want to hear about those. So I would say in my wrap up, yeah, I read this Julia Quinn book, yay, and go along. And then people started latching on to being like, no, come over to us. We want you to read those. Anyway, so she opened my eyes to romantic fantasy, which is hard to find. It's still hard to find. And yeah, I love how empowered she has her women be. And then the third thing, and to me, this is the biggest one, and this is why it's probably the reason why I get the most touchy if people pick at it, because if you're a fan, like we know, people are gonna mock her incessantly. We know it's a thing. Okay.
It's a thing.
I am not staring you down through my camera at all or anything, Charles.
Wait, I'm like I'm impartial. I'm like not in this.
I know you
at
are.
all.
But
I'm 100% like I want to hear your opinions and your thoughts. No judgment zone.
I'm not bitter about it at all. No. But anyway, the part of her that I think is the most powerful is how she works through some very tough topics and she takes her time to get through them. Specifically, I think of A Court of Mist and Fury, but I think even A Court of Silver Flames, which for quite a few people they were like, oh, this is so slow. Like, why are we suffering through this? Well, here's the thing. When someone has depression, when someone has self-hate, like scarred into them, it's not going to take just a sexy man telling you you're hot for you to be over it. Like, daddy issues are a real thing. So here's the thing. Daddy issues are a real thing. And speaking from someone who has them, well, no, like speaking from someone who has them, who came from a home where like, I have a good relationship with my dad now, but I didn't for many, many years. And feeling her, like, I don't want to do spoilers for I don't want to spoil people and stuff, but I think it's no secret to anyone who's read any of them that she has some daddy issues. We can see it all the way back in like the first one. So not spoiling how that works out, but I definitely saw shadows of like what I could have been like if I didn't forgive my dad, if we didn't work out our issues, if I didn't have him in my life, then I could have been like Nesta, where you hate, or if my dad had, if something happened to him and you just have to live with that. So I'm mostly speaking about this one because it's the most current one I've read, but the way that she deals with partner abuse and the way that she deals with depression and the way that she doesn't rush through those struggles. So for some people, they see it as like, oh, we're just moaning on about this, because it takes a long freaking time for those issues to work out. And even when we think we've worked them out, you backslide, because that's real. And I feel like she does that in so many of her books. We're working through things, and I just get so excited by that, because I know that happens in other books. Like I've read contemporary romance where we're working through that stuff. I've read
we're working through
where we're working through that stuff. But to have those same issues in a fantasy setting and say that just because we have magic, just because we have wings and we can fly or whatever, doesn't mean that you aren't still struggling with stuff. And so those are some of the main reasons for me that I just always know that I'm going to be really well taken care of in one of her books. Like she's not going to jump. Like you have to earn the payoff. Sometimes past the point where you're like, shut up, we get it already, but I feel like you have to earn it. And during quarantine, I watched a couple interviews. Well, not interviews. She did live shows with her husband on her channel. She talked about the depression she was going through, and her dad died while she was writing this book. So she's like, Nesta means more to me than anyone else, because I was going through this horrible depression, and she was afraid to get help because she had had other writer friends who lost their talent when they took medication for their clinical depression. So she said, she was like, I was afraid to lose everything, but I came to a point that if I wanted to still be a wife and a mom, I had to risk losing this to be alive, and I just thought that's so powerful, because we want to say like we're supportive of, be supportive like suicide prevention and stuff, but what does that mean? Like, what does that mean when we're depending on her to write this book? Like we're like, oh, plus maybe it doesn't have to be 700 pages so we can have it faster. And it's like she's working through stuff while she's writing these. And I don't know, a lot of my love for them is built into my love for her as a person too. I've actually got to go to her book signings, and I mean, for none of us have went in a long time, but I miss that so much. But yeah, for me, that's a huge part, is that because I follow her so closely, I know where a lot of her books are coming from and like what she's working through. And I just think it's really powerful. So there you go. I told you I'd have lots to say. So
no, that was all really good. One surprise question. Everything you said was really, really interesting. Kind of like changed my perspective a little bit. So like, thank you so much for like sharing like the reasons why you love it. Cause like, I don't want to like comment or really try to dissuade, but like, I just want to thank you so much for sharing your opinions. I think it's always really cool to see why we like something or why we love something that we do, or why we're indifferent to something, if that makes any sense. Like, what are the reasons why we love X story, or why we love X author, or why sometimes when an author does something bad, how does that make us feel about the book? So I think it's always really cool and just really critical exercise to like just like sit down and like kind of tease out the reasons why we love the things that we do. So like thank you so much. My pop question is kind of hearing the way you describe both series, I was wondering, do you recommend if someone is new to Sarah J. Maas, they start with ACOTAR or Throne of Glass as an
Yeah.
entry point if they have never read anything by this author?
Right. Ugh. It's a great question because, as I explained with my own journey, I think it really depends on where you're coming from. Like if you're a reader coming from YA, I think you should start with Throne of Glass because it has a lot of the tropes of the time that were happening in there, of like girl has a mission, there's not really, but there's kind of a love triangle thing happening at the beginning. So it like has those same feelings. And then it really builds the fantasy world that way. If you're a lover of romance, I feel like you should start with the ACOTAR series, even though that has some hairpin turns in that one, because I feel like you'll just connect, because that one also is first person point of view, and it's really you're in Feyre's head the whole time and you're there with her. Whereas Throne of Glass, that character's hiding a lot of stuff from you. So it's that kind of fantasy where you're entering one situation, but our heroine has info that she hasn't shared with us as the reader. You also get multiple point of views in that one. All of the, like, we really build the cast up, and there's lots of cool creatures. So that's why, like, there's two different avenues of it. If you're coming from like YA fantasy, I feel like the Throne of Glass, the first 3 books really are YA fantasy, and then it starts to ratchet. I mean, and even the whole series, like besides some of the more explicit sex, it still is written like a YA fantasy is, besides like the spiciness level. Whereas ACOTAR, I mean, it's a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and it's, there's less characters to worry about in the beginning of it.
It's like it's easier to latch on because it's like you said, it's more romance, so you don't have to like. I don't want to put say anything I shouldn't be saying, because what it kind of sounds like is like you have the romance, and then you don't necessarily have to pay attention as much to the world around you. Like it's not as much like from Throne of Grass. You see, like you have multiple POVs, you have creatures, you have like this whole like height, like she has a plan, she's withholding information, but it seems like ACOTAR is a little bit more, I would say, focused.
Yeah.
Because you're only in one character's POV.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, like she is experiencing the world for the first time, so it's like a little bit of like an easier entry, and then you have the romance.
Yeah.
To kind of help buoy you if you're like, I can't do with all of these like knowing all these characters and all this world detail.
Yeah. And also the angst level of ACOTAR, especially, I mean, again, in Throne of Glass, it builds to that angst level because we are like, there's a lot of people relying on you. But in the beginning, it's literally a like Hunger Games type of situation. She's brought into this competition. She's the only woman in the competition. She's the youngest one in the competition. And it has that, like I said, it has that vibe of like YA fantasy at the beginning. And yeah, whereas like ACOTAR, as you need to know the stuff, she supplies it. Whereas in the other one, there's a lot of stuff already on the board that like you don't know about. And when the character decides to tell you, that's when you know. So yeah, they're just really good. I really like them a lot, obviously. So, but and when we talk about Crescent City, that's a totally other, like, we always talk about the 2 main series, but then there's Myth that is Crescent City, and I put off reading that one for probably 6 months, just because I heard great things and then I heard not great things, and then I heard this, that, and the other thing, and then I was like, well, you know what? I love audiobooks, so let me do the audiobook, because then if it's a little bit boring, then we get going. And that definitely was one where that's like both things merged together, because there is so much going on, and she is info dumping stuff. But to me, none of it was like wasted, because you need to understand how the society works. And so she's subtly revealing that to you just by explaining a room, like just by going into a scene and her explaining everything that's happening. You get to see the different levels of what's going on, so that when it's time for the final conflict, she's already set up all the dominoes. And some of them you didn't even notice, but then when something gets mentioned, you're like, oh yeah, those sea creatures over there, she mentioned those in chapter 30, and now they're here. So
Now they're here.
yeah, that definitely one is for, like, that's definitely a high fantasy, even though it's kind of like urban fantasy. It's definitely like a high urban fan. I don't know if that's a genre, but but it's written like a steampunk, urban fantasy setting, but it also is high fantasy, because we have angels and demons and mermaids and seraph. Like, we have everything. And that's what I love, that she was just like, what's a magical creature? I'm going to dump you into my story. And so like, it's definitely set up for the second book. We won't have to do all of that setup. So that's probably not one I suggest as a starting point. Like, it's not, but I still want to mention that book, because when I read that book, I was so excited for this book, because I'd been waiting for years.
Okay.
Like, what more could she add? You know, I was like, what are you going to add to the story? And when I read how sophisticated a storyteller she'd become, when she wasn't writing like YA stuff anymore, I was like, this book is going to be amazing. And I think you see that, because the struggle that the character who's just slut shamed and treated poorly and hates herself, so she's taking a lot of risks, that's what's happening in Crescent City. And we see parts of that like in this one too. So
oh, that's cool.
Sorry.
No, you're completely fine. Thank you, Jen, so much for coming on and talking with me. Thank you so much for sharing like your love of Sarah J. Maas and why you love Sarah J. Maas. I think a lot of people are going to resonate with your reasons, because I definitely feel like some reasons are like universal, like why certain people like X author. So I think a lot of people are going to resonate with you. I'm super excited to be talking to other people who have like different opinions, and I'm really curious to see what are the things that like become a high point for someone else and become like a low point for something else. So someone else. So yes, thank you so much, Jen. I will link all of Jen's like social media links down below in the description box. So you guys definitely go subscribe, follow her on Instagram, and follow her on Instagram and Goodreads. Goodreads,
yep,
I think you're on Goodreads, on all the things. So I'll link those all down below. But thank you again, Jen, so much. And so up next, I have Steph from Novelty Corner. She is an amazing booktuber. We're doing the Side Changing read along together, which has been going phenomenally. Loving the books. And today we're going to be talking about, if you have watched the other segment, you know we're talking about Sarah J. Maas. So Steph, tell me a little bit about your journey with Sarah J. Maas. Like, how many books have you read by her? Have you read all of her books, only one series? Kind of tell me a little bit where you're coming from with Sarah J. Maas.
So I have read all of her books, and I think I started reading them back when I first started on BookTube, because I originally started out reading YA, and this is when it was a big push in YA that Sarah J. Maas was a YA author. So I've got some thoughts on that. But so I started reading them way back then, and I'm pretty sure, oh gosh, I'm trying to remember how many books are out. I think there might have been 4 or 5 books out in Throne of Glass, and maybe the first 2 books in the ACOTAR series. So I started out by reading those, and I have read all of them since then. And I, particularly for this video, I did manage to get through A Court of Silver Flames, just so I would be able to have a viewpoint.
That's dedication.
Yes. Yeah, it took a little bit this week to get through that. Yeah, I did read her books, and you know, I enjoyed the experience of reading them. I do think it's an interesting series to read, and I think it's been interesting to read it over a number of years, because my thoughts around the series have changed a little bit. And I think, yeah, it's just been an interesting journey, and also just to see how the writing has changed and how the books and the series have changed over time as well.
So you have you finished The Throne of Glass, or have you? Yep. Oh, you said you read all of them. Sorry.
I have read all of them.
I completely missed that. I heard 4 books and then 2 books, and then I was like, oh wait, and then she said, sorry, the wires in my brain didn't connect. So what would you say is your current stance on Sarah J. Maas? Do you love? Are you indifferent, or do you kind of hate Sarah J. Maas?
I'm kind of indifferent, and in saying that, it's sort of I'm happy to read her books, because I know what I'm going to get from them. So it's a very predictable sort of read for me. So I'm happy to read them, and I enjoy them when I read them. But it's afterwards that I usually start pulling holes and picking things at them. So it's a book series that I enjoy to read, but I also enjoy pulling apart, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like you, in the moment, it's fun to read. Yeah. But then after you finish reading it, you're like, wait, that didn't work. That didn't work. What about this?
Yeah,
what about this?
Or that bothered me, or
it's like the critical mind comes in. Like you still enjoy reading her, but like she isn't like your auto buy like Ilona Andrews or Nalini Singh. Like you'll gladly read her books, but like
I will. Yeah, definitely. And I know that there was a point where I did really love the books, and over the last couple of years that sort of shifted, and I think maybe it's because I've gotten older, or I've read other books that I have recognized as being those books that actually hold the elements of a story that I really, really love, or a series that I love, or the author is just more consistent, I suppose. So yeah, I know what I'm getting into. I enjoy reading them, but at the end of the day, I'm not going to hold them up and go, this is my favorite book of all time.
Yeah, I think Nalini Singh would be very angry at you. She'd be like, "What is this? What is this person doing?" Like, this is this is not like we all know.
Yes, no, I'm pretty sure I've read nearly all of Nalini's backlist now. I think there's a couple I haven't.
I would be surprised if you haven't.
Yeah, I haven't read a new one. I've got to pick that up. But yeah.
Okay, picking up where we left off. What are some of the reasons why I would guess that you would classify yourself as more indifferent, not hate or love? Like, what are some of the reasons why you have this stance on Sarah J. Maas?
I suppose in the end, I could take or leave it. There was a very big part of me that considered not reading A Court of Silver Flames. I know that I was not a fan of Nesta, and she's still probably not my favorite one. I liked her story in the actual her story arc, I suppose, but I was like not even remotely interested in this story. And even with I'm very curious with the Crescent City series as well to see what she does with it, because I'm not sold on that one either. I don't know why. I think in my head, I think her marketing plan is very interesting, or the marketing plan that Bloomsbury has for her.
Yeah, for her books.
Because it seems like
they're very all over the place. They're YA, but then
they're YA, but
I guess
they're not.
Court of Silver Flames was technically marketed as adult.
Yeah.
But then they brought the other three. I don't know if they're still in YA.
Well,
I'm a little bit confused.
Yeah, and it frustrates me a little bit because I still walk into bookshops here and I'm like, that book really doesn't belong on this category. It needs to go somewhere else.
So a 14-year-old shouldn't read unless they're like of the right maturity level.
The thing is, I've had 11-year-olds at my school. I've seen them reading Sarah J. Maas. I'm like, that's not a book for you. I'm like, and I don't censor books. Excuse me. I'm not one for censoring books and stopping kids from reading things that they're passionate about and what they want. But also I'm like, don't really think Sarah J. Maas is the right thing if you're a preteen. So it's an interesting relationship. But I also think that I don't know, maybe it's the way that I misinterpret it, but they seem to say one thing about a series, and I got really burnt with this in Crescent City because they were really pushing hard, I think, on the vampire aspect of it at one point. And so in my head, I'm like, oh, okay, urban fantasy. It's not urban fantasy. It's straight up. It's full on fantasy.
It's a borderline. It like straddles that line like very, very thin where it's like, it's really high fantasy. Urban fantasy doesn't have as much in-depth world building because it's our world, but with paranormal creatures. It's like a fine line, but there's like a clear difference. Like if you had to explain what New York City is, and like you're borderline, you're pushing more into the fantasy realm. If you have to explain everything.
Yeah, and I remember thinking while I was reading it, because I got really excited. So okay, urban fantasy, it's probably more my wheelhouse than say high fantasy. High fantasy isn't something I generally reach for, unless I know the author or the series. And I got really excited, and then I read it. I'm like, I'm having to do a lot of work here to try and figure this out. And then there would be little things that would seem more our world that would throw me out of it. And I think probably one of the top reasons that I struggle is that, you know, sometimes she puts in these little things that completely throw me out of the fantasy world, and that's okay. But at other times it's like, oh no, hang on, that's more something that I wouldn't expect to see in that book. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but as a reader, I tend to be pretty black and white with my fantasy and my stuff that's not fantasy. So for me, that throws me. Yeah. So it's one of those strange things where I enjoy reading it, and then I get to certain points, I'm just like, hang on a second, what are you doing? What are you trying to make me think as a reader? So
yeah.
And it's funny because being that you know, sort of indifferent, it's almost like fence sitting, and it's really hard to explain sort of why. But for me, like I know what my favorite books are, and I know what I don't like, and this style of writing sort of sits right in the middle where I can read it, or my life's not going to change if I don't read it either. So if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like, if you're indifferent, it makes sense that most of the things would be take it or leave it. Like, you either nothing. I would say, like, I'm generalizing at this point, so correct me if I'm wrong. Nothing in her books like really like teeter you to one end or the other.
Yeah.
It's like firmly in, like, obviously you call like the 3-star range, 3 to 4-star range, where like you like it, but you like it for what it is, and you don't expect it to be like, you just it just is what it is. Like, take, like you said, take it or leave it.
And definitely now my ratings tend to be sort of between 3 and 4 stars. I have given other books in the past 5-star reads, and I'm a big mood reader, so depending on what I'm feeling when I'm reading the book can influence that. So there, and I think I read, like, when I first read the Sarah J. Maas books, they were books that I had never read anything before, and I came from a background, I suppose, when I was in my late teens, I read a lot of high fantasy, which I don't do anymore because I get really stuck on too many characters, too many plots. I can't keep track of it all. But I started with those, and so I know high fantasy, and I've spent a lot of time reading it. And this was an easier way of getting in. Her books are an easier way of getting into that sort of genre. So I appreciated that, and I did like the way that she built up characters and found family and all of that sort of stuff. Those are things that I like seeing in books. But as I've read more books and I've read books that appeal to me more, it's sort of shifted where all of those sit. But I'm reluctant to go back and reread them and change my ratings, because I think that at the time that I read them, those ratings were accurate. So yeah. So what they get now is probably more reflective of what I would give them if I did go back and reread them. But I'm sort of reluctant to do that.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like, rereading is kind of scary. It can be like, unless like you absolutely know, like, these are like your hardcore, your favorite books. I have reread books that I came back 2 years later, and I reread it. I'm like, what the hell was I thinking? Like, this is like clearly not a 5-star. This is more like a 2-star. And then if I read it again in the future, like, it depends on like my mood. Like, I know what's happening. Like, unless like even for books I absolutely love, I feel like it's really hard to survive that. It's really hard to survive that reread, because like you already know what's gonna happen. You already know the characters, the beats, everything. You kind of like, I don't know. It's hard to enjoy a story unless it's told really, really well. Unless you enjoy the storytelling, where you can almost like forget that you already know what's going to happen. If that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
But any other lingering thoughts? Any other reasons?
Yeah, so I made notes because I knew I would forget these. So it's not. I think she's very inconsistent in her pacing in her books, and you have these long. I don't want to say info dumpy, because I don't think she does it as badly as I've seen done. But you get huge chapters where you set up whatever, and then you get this tiny little action plot, and then you've got another 200 pages before you get to the next thing. And I definitely felt that in A Court of Silver Flames. I think there was a lot of build up, and part of me knows the reason why, but I don't think she's as tight as I like to see in a story, especially one that is so popular and that you know that a lot of people are coming to the books with a lot of prior knowledge. So you don't need to spend heaps of time going back over things. And linked to that, I think she's terrible at endings. I think she just draws them out. It reminds me of the Lord of the Ring endings in the movies, where you just get this and then this happens and then this happens in a way of trying to resolve everything. And she tries to tie everything in a neat little bow. And I think in a fantasy series, you don't really need to do that. I think you need to leave it open. And as a reader, I like open endings. I don't think every couple needs to be paired off. I don't think everyone needs, like, your main couple needs a happily ever after or happy for now, but not everyone around them needs that. And sometimes it feels like she tries to wrap all of that up so that it gives people satisfaction. But for me, it almost does the opposite. So that's an entirely personal preference. But I like to think about what could happen afterwards. So I suppose in a way that bothers me a little bit when it's like, oh no, everything's perfect and here we go.
Everything gets kind of like, I guess would you say, like, put a bow on it? Like, put a bow on top of it. Like, every single thing, every character is in a relationship. Every problem has been resolved. There is no open ending. You know exactly what's going to happen to your couple. You like something like that work where you can think of, like, what is that character doing? What is this character doing like 10 years down the road? Like,
and I think, you know, I know the ACOTAR series is really well loved, and I do enjoy it, and I enjoy all the characters in the series, but I don't need a story for every single person in that series, because it feels like the first 3 books felt complete. And sometimes it's going a bit back to the marketing, you know, we're going to sell books, so we're going to keep doing it, and that's fine if she's got stories to do that. I think that's totally fine. And chances are I'll probably read them. I've got a couple of exceptions on my list of characters that I won't read, but you know, sometimes I think there's a big push in the book industry and with readers as well. I know it's something people like to go back and visit beloved characters, but I also think sometimes we need to let them sit as well, because then you have the tendency for things to go in directions that you don't like, and that's where you get people getting really frustrated and cranky. So it's a tough one, because I like endings that let me think about what could happen next, but I think part of that was because I grew up as a fan fiction writer, so I like open endings because then you get to play in the sandbox.
You get to take the characters wherever you want to.
And so that's how I tend to think about most types of media. I don't need everything wrapped up nice and neatly, but so inconsistent pacing and the endings, it's one of those things I'm just like, I haven't enjoyed the endings of her series or her arcs so far. So they've always been my lowest rated books that I've read of hers. So but that's entirely personal opinion.
No, I'm gonna say this in the
no shade on anyone else.
Video, do not come for anyone in the comments. Like, everyone I think knows my position, but I'm 100% out of this. I'm not refuting anyone's opinions. Like, I want to hear other people's opinions, and I think it's important for other booktubers, like, just like people in the community who watch booktube, just to listen to different opinions and 100%. Kind of see, because I think there's some things where
and I can say I gave the ACOTAR series to my best friend, and she was going through a pretty rough time, and this is one of her favorite series of all time, and so we talk about it a lot with her, because for her at the time that she needed something to take her mind off what was going on, this series became everything to her. So we have really great discussions around it. So I know that, you know, everyone's opinion is always different, and I think that's the beauty of being able to talk about it, because it's not that one person's idea is right or wrong, but that we all come at it with different experiences, and it makes it really important to have these discussions, especially with especially about authors or books who are so well loved and who do get so much media hype. Maybe I'm just afraid of all of the hype. I'm just like, I'm gonna stand back.
Hype is a deadly thing. It can either ruin books for people, or it can actually be one of those books that like
Yeah.
miraculously lives up to the hype, and you're like, okay, I get what everyone's talking about. This book
Yeah.
totally deserves it. Or it can torpedo a book.
It can
Like,
definitely.
everyone is hyping about the book drops, everyone reads it, ratings plummet. That can happen too.
Yes. Yes.
But
You should think, am I going to be the person who loves this or the person who hates it?
yeah, I'm probably most likely going to be the person who hates it, just like my
Yeah.
like my track record, just my track record.
Nothing
But
wrong with that.
but I think that's a great point to kind of leave off on our discussion. Thank you so much, Steph, for just coming on my channel, sharing your opinion, and really kind of helping me, helping everyone else see different sides to why people may hate, like, or be indifferent to Sarah J. Maas. I think there's validity in every opinion. I will link all your social media links down below. You're on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and Goodreads. Anything
I'm on
else?
Goodreads, yes. I have a blog
And on Goodreads.
as well.
And a blog. I will find that and I will link it in the description box.
I'll send it to you.
Okay, good. But thank you so much, Steph. Again, thank you so much. And
Thank you.
I will talk to you. Hey, up next we have Carrie from Books for Romance. I always think I forget your channel name sometimes. I'm like, is it Book for Romance or Booked for Romance?
Right.
Like without the ED.
It's
like
ED.
I have to remember. I have to remember that. Like sometimes I just go, let me just Google Carrie. That's the easiest.
I know.
That would take me the easiest way.
Right. I couldn't pick a harder channel name if I tried. I'm like trying to play off words and then it's just like, oh, fail.
Because you have book and then you have booked. It's like such a slight difference.
For sure.
Because then people think romance books. They're like, no, you're booked for romance.
Right.
It's clever, but
we need to work
off the top
on
of that. But off the top, tell me a little about your Sarah J. Maas reading journey. Have you read all her books? How'd you kind of get into her books and into her various worlds that she has created?
Well, I have read all of her books. So I actually only own a few physical copies of her books because they're so massive. As you can see, I own only a few of her physical books. But let's be real here. I'm going to go off a tangent here. I'm sorry. But I haven't really loved how she makes you buy multiples of her books. If you have to I got these because I ordered the Illumicrate edition and then I ordered I wanted to see her in person and they all came with books. And then I wanted her edition for the special chapters.
The special edition.
Right. And then I'm like, well, then that's 4 books right there. Okay. So we're totally going off a tangent though. Sorry. So yes, my journey was, I've read all her books. I started with the ACOTAR series, which is really interesting. And then I went over to her Throne of Glass series. So I read her maybe backwards, if you would consider with her print dates. So yeah, I fell in love with the ACOTAR series. And then I really did enjoy the Throne of Glass series. So.
Okay. And so what is your stance on Sarah J. Maas? Do you love, hate, or are you indifferent to Sarah J. Maas?
I
and
think
tell
I
me
have
your
a
top 3
special
reasons
opinion
why.
about her because I love her she was the first fantasy romance I ever found. It was for me, I could not find fantasy romance to save my life. Now it's a different story. You can find it here and there. There's more authors coming out with it. But this was really the first fantasy romance I found. And I just fell in love with it. I fell hard. It wasn't big at the time. I was walking in right before the Sarah J. Maas bubble. So I was walking in right when I was oh, this is really interesting, this ACOTAR series, because I feel like her ACOTAR series really blew up. And then people are starting to come back to read her Throne of Glass series. But I know her Throne of Glass series was big too. But that's kind of how I kind of walked into it. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what would you say are the top 3 reasons why you love Sarah J. Maas? You don't have to go personal if you don't want to. You can keep it surface level, whatever you want to share.
Honestly, I'm going to give you one reason. One reason is entertainment value. Literally, I am friggin' entertained from start to finish. I don't rate, I'm not a writer. So I don't rate it as oh, this has to be a work of art. I want to be in depth in that book. If you have me and you're in the world and you have me entertained,
That's what I rated on. If you could take me out of my world when I hear what I'm doing right now and push me somewhere else, that's where I go with that.
Hmm. And kind of building off of that, what are some of the things that it doesn't have to be necessarily Sarah J. Maas, but in general, what are the things that really kind of suck you in into a book and like provides that entertainment value? Is it like the characters, the writing, the
Right.
plot, or is it like it's just like this hodgepodge of everything that kind of comes if it comes together right, it works for you?
Right. I think a lot of it is one, world building, and two, it has to have the perfect mix of like romance and fantasy. And I think a lot of authors struggle with that. You either have too much fantasy or you really do have too much romance. I feel something that Sarah really excels at is mixing the two together where you have an interesting plot, you have strong heroines and characters, and you also get this really sweet romance in it. Now, granted to say it is like cheesy at some points, but I'm kind of in there for the cheese factor a little bit. I love historical romances. I love contemporaries. I really do love the things she puts in there, and she just has me from the get-go. There's things I could spout about that I love about each series, and there's things I could tell you that I dislike about each series as well. I mean, I'm kind of like, since she's my favorite, I feel like I am a little harder on her. I could definitely tell you both both sides to the coin.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. That kind of like almost a dichotomy between fantasy and romance because
Right,
they mean like if you slap the label on if you slap the label of any book, if you put romance on any book,
right.
that automatically like locks you into certain like tropes or
Hmm.
certain things that because like to be a romance you have to have a happily ever after.
Right.
If it's in a trilogy, you can stretch it if it follows the same characters and give it to them at the end.
Hmm.
But it's almost like just by definition, sometimes like having like striking that perfect mix of like being a fantasy and being firmly a romance almost a little bit coincide a little bit to some degree because a romance is a romance because the romance is the main plot line.
Right.
And there really isn't, there may be other subplots to kind of bolster it, but there usually isn't like another competing, like there isn't like a big villain as an A
Right.
plot and then like the romance is a B plot. So it seems
Right.
like what you're saying is that like Sarah J. Maas does really well at mixing the two genres where
Hmm.
if you're a romance reader, you won't be disappointed.
Right.
But if you're a fantasy reader, you still get that kick. But
Right.
then she doesn't break any of the two conventions
Right.
for each of those two genres, if that makes sense.
Oh,
Is that
totally.
am I correct in
100%.
that?
Yeah,
Hmm.
because at the end of the day, I still want my plot. I still want my wars. I still want like the element of like magic and things like that. But then I want it to be like where they're fighting for love. Like I love that element of they're fighting to be together as soulmates or whatever, mated beings or whatever, like, and I love how she does that. And she's just I got to meet her and she's just the sweetest person. And like she engages with her fans. She's never like above them. She always loves to take, I mean, obviously now she's getting to be bigger, so it's harder to like,
It's harder to do that stuff.
right, especially when you have like millions of people trying to be like, hey, why don't you write about this,
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool because one of the things that I wanted to kind of things I want to tease out a little bit is kind of that author really like reader relationship in a little bit of ways and how
Right.
that plays into I would say like loving like an author's work, if that makes any sense. I'm like my brain is like not working fast enough, but my
No,
mouth is moving
this is
my
you're
mouth is
totally
moving
making sense.
faster before the question comes out. So I wanted to know, is there anything that like you like about Sarah that transition into things that you love about her books? If that makes any sense?
Yeah, I mean, just because she's such a down to earth, kick butt person, like even on her lives, like you could see, like she tries to engage as much as she can, but it's one of those things where it's like, you you have so many fans, and I could see where it's like she kind of like wants to please everybody, and that gets difficult sometimes, especially with your books. So she is such a sweet and down to earth person. So I love that, for the fact that I could see, like, I could almost be like, this sounds very stalkerish though, but I feel like we could be best friends, you know what I mean? Like, just because she seems like that time of like down to earth type of girl. And I love that. Like, yeah, if an author is cool, it just makes the book so much cooler though, honestly. For me anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. And then one other question that it kind of came up a little bit spur of the moment. It's
Right.
not putting you on the spot or anything, so do not worry. I'm wondering if someone is coming new to Sarah J. Maas, do you
Okay.
recommend, it seems like I could be wrong. I could be wrong. I do not know everything about the fandom,
Right.
but it seems like your story of like starting with ACOTAR series and then going back to
Right.
Throne of Glass, that seems like a big commonality against a lot of people who end up like really, really loving Sarah J. Maas. So I was wondering, we didn't talk too much about Crescent City, but between those three, you have Throne of Glass, Crescent City, and ACOTAR. Which one would you recommend to someone who is new to Sarah J. Maas? Do you recommend like they start with like the OG Throne of Glass, or kind of do it how you do, or you think you should send them to Crescent City?
I think ACOTAR is probably a safe bet, just because how she lays out the world is so easy to follow along. I think one of the things about her Throne of Glass series, and this is, like I said, things I liked about the author, things I didn't like about the author. I think she really did get her stride with the ACOTAR series, where, you know, as a beginner writer, this is her first series. You could tell by the first two books that she wrote in the Throne of Glass series, it was her first series. And once you kick that third book into gear, you're like sold with the rest of the series. And like you said with Crescent City, like, I mean, I have to admit, like, Crescent City for me still rated a 4.5, because I'll tell you what, starting out with that book, it was like at a 3. And I was like, Sarah, what are
Oh,
you
really?
doing to me? But that last 20% really like changed the game for me. But I mean, because she's a loved author, maybe that had something to do with my rating of that book. But I'll tell you what, in Crescent City, she totally info dumped that whole thing in the first 70%. So it's and this is from someone coming as a beloved person that I love her. I'll read anything she puts out there. But I think that she could have, I don't know, did a more along the lines of ACOTAR, where she like integrated the world a little bit more, instead of just throwing it all out there at the beginning where people had to like read through that. Like, so like I said, like, all authors aren't perfect, and we all have our issues with our favorites. Like, you have to think, like, people, when you think of your favorites, I'm sure you can think of things that they could have done better, or you're harder on them on certain books because they're your favorites. But yeah, I mean, for entertainment factor alone, Sarah's always going to have a fan in me anyway. But I have to admit, though, I do like her Throne of Glass heroine, Aelin, a little bit more than I like Freya from the ACOTAR series. So, I mean, I definitely have my favorites, which is weird because I like the ACOTAR series better. So it's one of those things where you'll, you know, as a favorite author, I could see the pros and the cons to when people say, I don't like her, I can kind of understand it. But then I also love her. Just, I do.
Yeah. I think that's a good point that you bring up. One of the reasons why I wanted to do this, and I may like consider doing this for other authors, because I
Right.
think in BookTube sometimes it's used for like clicks, saying like, "Oh, I have the unpopular opinion," or "Let me take down a book that a lot of people love in a really sarcastic manner." And
Right.
like it's meant to provide entertainment value, but if you're a fan of it, you're like, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa." Like,
Right.
like
Right.
like you knew you were going to like it, so why are you reading it just to make fun of it? And same
Right.
on the other side. Um, People who love the book sometimes like don't want to listen to any of the people that may have like valid criticisms
Right.
against the books and vice versa. So I think it's a great exercise in general to really kind of pick apart like why you love the things that you love. Like what is it about you as a reader, are you more critical? Are you looking for like more thematic elements? Because like there's two like you don't have to be a critical reviewer to like be
Right.
on BookTube. You don't have to talk about the symbolism, the arcs, the character motivations, the
Right.
writing style. You don't have to get into that mechanics. You can just simply either you liked it or bored you to tears. And each
Right.
critique is valuable because at the end of the day, we all read books for fun. We read it for entertainment. We read them as side hobbies. It isn't our job to read books unless like you get into a point where you're getting a bunch of arcs and then like you kind of like start to function as like a little bit like it's a little bit of a side hustle, but that's a
Right.
whole other video. But what I'm trying to say is that it's really good to have these discussions
Oh, for
in
sure.
a way where no one is being attacked for their opinion. So I will say this again. I mentioned this many times throughout this video. Please do not come for anyone in this video for voicing their opinions. This is meant to just be like a really cool exercise to see what are the commonalities between people who love Sarah J. Maas, people who are indifferent, and people who hate Sarah J. Maas. Because I
Right.
definitely feel like there's going to be some overlap. So some things may
Right.
work for others, and some things may not work for others. And there's no wrong or right side. Like I can say X about Sarah J. Maas, and I take it like that's definitive. If you
Right.
say anything else, like no, you're wrong. Sorry, your opinion is wrong. Not what we're doing here. But
Right.
thank you again, Carrie.
Oh,
I want to ask you any other follow up
one
thoughts.
more thing. Sarah is having the Akratar series come. Did you already mention this?
No.
Come to TV. So it's going to be a TV show on Hulu. So she just dropped that today, Charles. I sent it to you. No joke. Like,
I'm all for more YA books, just books in general being adapted. I
right.
think honestly, like I think there's a lot of reasons why I think Hollywood doesn't like new ideas. So it's like easier to take a series that has like millions and millions of fans and say,
Right.
let's make a TV show out of this. But it really like I just wish all adaptations luck because I really think it helps
That's hard.
establish authors even
Right.
more than just selling. Because I think even though there's like a ton of number one New York Times bestsellers over times, like Angie Thomas hit it, this person hit it, this person hit number one. And I think what really kind of helps them transition over to like this is like a mainstream juggernaut because there's some big authors in romance like J.R. Ward hasn't been
Right.
adapted, Tessa Dare hasn't been adapted. Like there's so many authors that like sell thousands of millions of copies, but they
Right.
don't have adaptation. But then you look at like Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, they
Right.
had Twilight, they had these big movie franchises, and now that's what most people are going to read because I think we're a little bit anomaly in that we read a lot more than the average person. So a
Right.
lot of people are just like Sarah J. Maas who? Like what?
Right.
Like what are you talking about? Like what is that guitar?
Right.
Is that like Harry Potter? Is that like Twilight? Is that like those are the
Right.
ones that like people that even reach non-readers is what I'm trying to say. So like
No, I
that's
totally get
great
it.
news. I'm super happy for Sarah. It's always good news. I know I thought I heard like rumors about it like years ago when the
See,
books first came out, and now it's just finally. I'm worried a bit about being on Hulu, but like
me
we'll
too.
see
Me too.
because like, oh, I was gonna say this as a little quick segue because like everyone knows like Disney owns Hulu and all that stuff. There was a whole like Love Victor situation
Oh,
that happened that made me go like, I was
right.
like, you do not shame Becky Albertalli on this channel. Like, how dare you? Like,
Right.
that book is a masterpiece. I'm sorry. It's like that's a whole different opinion, but yes. Super excited for that. And yeah, any other lingering thoughts?
No, I was just thank you so much for having me. I just, it's one of those things like you had said, like I just hope they start adapting more authors because at the end of the day, like the writing's good when you're selling millions of copies. And I'm not gonna lie, we can only see so many of the same movie like another one and another one and another one. I'm happy for those franchises, but I would really like them to do more, you know, contemporaries, historicals, like the Hating Games being adapted. I mean, I want also, like, I'd like some diverse authors to be adapted as well. Like, just everything, just to get it, you know, to start adapting. These books are really good and they're just sitting out there, and it's just like, I feel like they're buying the rights and then they're just like shoving them away. And I'm like, come on, you know that there's a market for it. Like you said, look how good Twilight did. And it's like, nothing else is out there like that. It's like they stopped with that. And it's like they could do more paranormal and they haven't. And I don't know why. So.
Yeah. We would never know what's going on in Hollywood. I don't try to, but thank you so much, Carrie. I enjoyed talking with you. I will link all your different socials and your channel down below so you can go subscribe to Carrie, follow on Instagram, follow on Twitter, and then Goodreads. Anything else I'm missing?
That's all of them.
That's it? Okay, good. You don't have like a book club or like a blog or like
I'm a small little channel. I keep it simple. I just enjoy books, bottom line. So
that is good. So it's been so great to chat with you and kind of hear your opinions on Sarah J. Maas and just kind of like get to know you a little bit better as a reader. So thank you so much. And I'll talk to you later, Carrie.
Bye, Charles.
So wow, if you made it through that entire video, kudos to you, gold star for you, because it was a long one, over an hour, and don't tell me that I don't give you guys any long videos. So let's kind of talk about the reasons why I personally do not like Sarah J. Maas. And so I'm only really basing this on the Court or ACOTAR series. I've never read Throne of Glass. I believe I only read the prequel, like novella bind up for the Throne of Glass series, but I have read the first 3 books in the ACOTAR series. So that's gonna be where most of my critique will be coming from. So let's get into the very, very basic reason is that I just don't really enjoy her writing style. I find it very grating, very abrasive, and very manipulative. Which, let me explain that point. Sometimes I feel that the author really kind of handholds the reader throughout the whole entire narrative, especially with the writing. If something is important, Sarah J. Maas is going to mention it like 20 different times, so we just don't forget it. And in any direction that she wants to take the plot or the characters, she will constantly mention in the writing and be overly repetitious to make that point come home. And sometimes I find that when she tries to be a little bit more lyrical and very descriptive, it just comes off being very repetitive and just overall very grating. And that brings me on to my second reason. It's really kind of the plot and characters just don't work for me. Because I've mentioned a little bit of that manipulative aspect in the writing, and I find that a lot in her plot and characters. Really, when Sarah J. Maas wants plot and the characters to go a certain direction, she will intentionally set up the characters in a way so that you have no other reason but to kind of follow her direction. And it leaves no kind of wiggle room for any type of like, well, I think the characters could go this way and this way. No, 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 no. Take, for instance, how Sarah J. Maas kind of deals with love interests. And it is widely known throughout most of her series, she tends to like have one love interest and then the character moves on to another love interest, and then finally probably the third or fourth one is the love interest that is true endgame. And instead of just kind of just writing a relationship that just kind of falls to the cracks, she intentionally kind of just torpedoes the current male love's interest character to the point where you just absolutely hate them. So when you bring in love interest number 2, oh my goodness, it looks so much better. And in terms of the plot, I dare someone to try and summarize the plot of the whole ACOTAR series because I really don't feel like there's any plot to it. But yet these books are like over 500 pages, which just kind of baffles me. And don't even get me started on Crescent City. That book was a chore to get through. And that are some of my reasons why I don't particularly love Sarah J. Maas's works. Now, this is not a dig to anyone who likes Sarah J. Maas's books. You can like what you like. I don't have to like what you like. For me, especially when I first entered the community, Sarah J. Maas was like one of the biggest and highly talked about authors. So I just kind of just binge read all of the ACOTAR series and I gave them all 5 out of 5 stars. But when I really kind of looked back on it and went back to reread it, I realized I didn't pay attention to like over like 80% of the story. I distinctly remember when I listened to ACOTAR on audio, I actually fell asleep like somewhere in the midpoint of the book, and I just like woke up on the last 5 chapters, and instead of just going, hey, let me go back and reread that section, I just said like, I can still understand what's happening, so let's just continue on with it. So I really had a very warped, very clipped view of that series. So when I actually went to read, I was kind of like, I don't know, Charles, what the hell you were thinking when you rated this 5 out of 5 stars and bought all these books by this author. So let's kind of sum up this whole thing. So I think there are some purely like craft or critical points of why you may like, dislike, or may be indifferent to an author, but I think a lot of the reasons sometimes, especially if you love an author, it really comes from emotional connection. You connect to the characters, you connect to the plot, and maybe you connect to the writing. So I think it is, in general, very important to just take a moment and kind of reflect on why we like the things that we like and why we don't like the things that we like, because I think that helps inform us as readers and helps hone our reading taste and really helps us articulate our reading taste. I just thought this was a very fun video because I just wanted to cash it on the Sarah J. Maas hate that I tend to spew out in the community, so you're welcome. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Let me know down in the comment section down below if you want to see me do this for another author. And thank you guys so much for watching. I'll catch you guys in a brand new video.